The ancient city sprawled across kilometers of the arena, a monument to some long-dead civilization that existed only in replicated memory. Yuna moved through the ruins like a ghost, her footsteps silent on stone that had witnessed countless forgotten stories. Every muscle in her body ached, her vision blurred at the edges from exhaustion and dehydration, but her focus remained absolute. She had chosen her battlefield carefully. A collapsed tower near the city's center, its upper floors fallen inward to create a maze of broken walls and tilted passages. Multiple entry points, limited sightlines, and plenty of cover. This was where she would make her stand. She climbed to the third level, moving slowly to conserve energy. Her hands left bloody prints on the stone where her blistered palms touched surfaces. She had pushed her body beyond its limits and it was failing her, but not yet. Not until this was finished. Corval tracked her easily through the streets. Her trail was obvious now. She was too tired to hide it properly. Blood drops marked her path, along with disturbed dust and scuff marks on the ancient pavement. She was wounded, exhausted, and trapped in a dead-end structure. The hunt was finally over. He approached the tower cautiously, scanning for traps. His sensors detected her heat signature on the third floor, stationary, probably collapsed. He had seen prey act this way before, fought until they simply couldn't fight anymore. It was almost disappointing that it would end this way, but he felt a measure of respect for her persistence. The tower's entrance was wide enough for his massive frame. He stepped inside, weapons ready, armor fully activated. The interior was dim, lit only by sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls. Debris covered the floor, making each step potentially unstable. He climbed carefully, following her trail upward. On the third floor, he found her. Yuna stood in the center of a large chamber, surrounded by fallen pillars and broken stone. She had discarded her rifle. It lay on the ground a few meters away, ammunition spent. She held only her blade now, a simple combat knife made of steel that looked like a toy compared to his advanced weaponry. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood and dirt. She swayed slightly as she stood, as if staying upright required all her concentration. But her eyes were clear, and they met his without fear. "So you finally stop running," Corval said. His voice echoed through the chamber. "I admit you lasted longer than I expected. You have shown remarkable survival skills for such a weak species. But this ends now." Yuna didn't respond. She was conserving her breath, her energy, everything she had left. Words were wasted effort. Corval raised his plasma cannon, the weapon charging with a high-pitched whine. "You fought well. That is worth acknowledging. Any final words?" "Yes," Yuna said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I learned everything I needed to know about you. Now let me show you what one human can do when they have nothing left to lose." Corval fired. The plasma bolt screamed across the chamber, a sphere of superheated energy that would vaporize her instantly. But Yuna had been watching his stance, his grip, the angle of the weapon. She knew when he would fire a microsecond before he pulled the trigger. She dove sideways, and the bolt passed through the space where she had been standing, hitting a carefully positioned stone pillar behind her. The pillar exploded, sending shrapnel in a calculated spray. None of it penetrated Corval's armor. But that wasn't the point. Mixed with the stone fragments were spores she had collected from the jungle days ago, stored carefully in her pack. They released their electromagnetic signature, and Corval's sensors immediately began glitching. 43 seconds. She had 43 seconds of opportunity. Yuna moved, not away from Corval but toward him, closing the distance before he could compensate for his sensor failure. He swung his weapon like a club, relying on his physical superiority. She ducked under the strike, feeling the air pressure from the massive weapon passing overhead. She couldn't overpower him. She had known that from the start. But she could use his strength against him. As he recovered from the swing, off balance, for just a moment she struck at his knee joint with her blade, not the armor itself, which was impenetrable, but the flexible joint where mobility required a gap in protection. The blade scraped against the joint, not penetrating but wedging into the tiny space between armor plates. She twisted it, using leverage rather than strength, forcing the joint to lock at an awkward angle. Korval stumbled, his leg refusing to bend properly. He reached for her, his massive hand closing on her shoulder. His grip was crushing, and she felt bones crack under the pressure. But she had expected pain. She had prepared for it. Pain was just information her instructors had taught her. Information you could choose to act on later. She used his grip on her as an anchor point, pulling herself closer rather than trying to escape. Her free hand struck at his elbow joint, the same technique, wedging her blade into another vulnerable point. The armor was perfect protection, but perfect protection required flexibility at the joints, and flexibility meant gaps. Korval threw her away, sending her crashing into a wall hard enough to crack the ancient stone. She fell, unable to breathe for a moment, her vision going dark around the edges. Everything hurt. Her body was telling her to stay down, to give up, that she had done enough. But humans don't quit. That was what Commander Hana had said. That was what Yuna believed with every fiber of her being. So she stood up, blade still somehow in her hand, and faced him again. Korval's sensors came back online. He saw her standing there, broken but unbowed, and felt something he had never experienced before. Not fear of death, but fear of what this meant. This tiny, fragile creature should have died days ago, should have surrendered when her supplies ran out, should have given up when the odds became impossible. But she hadn't, and she wouldn't. And that realization was more terrifying than any weapon. Why? He demanded. Why do you continue? You cannot win. Your body is failing. One more hit and you will die. Why not surrender? Yuna smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Because I'm human. We walked out of caves with nothing but rocks and conquered our entire planet. We went to space in metal boxes that shouldn't have worked. We do impossible things because we don't accept that they're impossible. You asked how many humans it takes to win a war. The answer is one, because one human who won't quit is an army by themselves. She attacked again, and this time, there was no strategy beyond survival. She threw herself at him with everything she had left, knowing this was her last chance. Her blade found his joints again and again, not causing damage but interfering with movement. She made herself unpredictable, attacking from angles that didn't make tactical sense, forcing him to react rather than plan. Korval fought back, but something had changed. He was fighting defensively now, trying to protect his joints, trying to predict her movements. And she was chaos incarnate, acting on instinct and desperation rather than logic. They crashed through the chamber, destroying what remained of the ancient architecture. Korval's superior strength should have ended it immediately, but Yuna made every exchange cost him something. A locked joint here, a compromised sensor there. Death by 1,000 cuts, except she was the one being cut and still kept coming. Finally, Korval saw his opening. He caught her with a backhand strike that sent her sprawling, her blade flying from her grip. She hit the ground and didn't get up this time. She tried, but her body simply wouldn't respond. She had nothing left. Korval approached slowly, his plasma cannon charging for the final shot. You fought better than anyone I have ever faced, he said, and meant it. Your species should be proud. Yuna looked up at him from the ground. She couldn't stand, couldn't fight, could barely breathe. But she could still think. And thinking, she noticed something. 7 days of combat had taken their toll on Korval's armor too. The joints she had targeted showed wear. The systems she had disrupted had been stressed. And there, beneath his helmet, the thermal vent that expelled waste heat from his system showed a hairline crack. 7 days of learning. 7 days of studying. All for this one moment. She had one move left. One desperate, probably suicidal move. She planted her hands, gathered what little strength remained in her legs, and launched herself forward in a final lunge. Not at his weapon, not at his body, but at that one vulnerable point she had been working toward since day one. Korval fired, but she was already inside his reach, too close for the weapon to track. She felt the heat of the blast pass by her, felt her hair singe and her skin blister from the proximity, but she was moving on pure instinct now, beyond conscious thought. Her blade, retrieved during the lunge, found the crack in the thermal vent. She drove it home with both hands, using her falling body weight as leverage, pushing with everything she had. The blade penetrated. Korval froze. His armor systems went haywire, overheating without proper ventilation. He reached up to remove the blade, but the damage was done. His enhanced body, pushed to its limits and dependent on the armor's cooling systems, began to shut down. He fell to his knees, then forward onto his face. The impact shook the floor. Yuna lay beside him, unable to move, barely conscious. She had done it. Somehow, impossibly, she had done it. Day 5 began with the arena transforming into a desert wasteland. The jungle disappeared as if it had never existed, replaced by endless dunes of red sand stretching to every horizon. The sun climbed high and merciless, baking the landscape with heat that shimmered in visible waves. The temperature soared past 50 degrees within the first hour. Yuna wrapped cloth around her head and face, protecting herself from the sun and the blowing sand. She had rationed her water carefully, but in this heat she knew her supply wouldn't last long. Dehydration would become a serious problem soon. Her body was already pushed to its limits. 4 days of constant movement, minimal sleep, and high stress had worn her down. Her hands shook slightly when she held her rifle. Her legs ached with every step, but her mind remained sharp. That was all that mattered. Korval thrived in the desert. His armor regulated his temperature perfectly, and he had no need for water or rest. The open terrain suited him, giving his sensors clear lines of sight for kilometers in every direction. He could see Yuna now, or at least her heat signature, moving across the dunes like a small flickering flame against the burning sand. He pursued her directly, no longer bothering with caution. In this environment, she had nowhere to hide, no way to obscure her trail. This was where the hunt would end. Yuna knew she couldn't outrun him in the desert. She needed a different approach. She found what she was looking for near midday. A cluster of reflective crystalline formations jutting from the sand, probably minerals deposited by some ancient water source. The crystals caught the sunlight and threw it in multiple directions, creating a dazzling display of reflected beams. She positioned herself behind the crystals and waited. When Korval's sensors locked onto her position, he approached cautiously. The crystals would interfere with his thermal imaging, creating multiple false signatures. He slowed his advance, weapons raised, expecting an ambush. What he didn't expect was for his visual sensors to be overloaded by reflected sunlight bouncing off the crystals at calculated angles. Yuna had positioned small pieces of reflective material from her gear around the formation, creating a focused beam that hit his optical sensors directly. For 3 seconds, his visual input whited out completely. 3 seconds. She used them to relocate again, crawling through the sand to a position 70 meters away behind a different dune. By the time his vision cleared and he swept the area, she was gone. "Enough games," Korval announced, his voice carrying across the desert. "You cannot win by running. Face me directly or die tired and alone in this wasteland." Yuna didn't respond. She was conserving energy, controlling her breathing, staying as still as possible in the scorching heat. Every word he spoke gave away his position. Every moment he spent talking was a moment she spent recovering. In the observation post, Captain Kyung studied the biometric data scrolling across his screen. Her vital signs are concerning. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure dropping, core temperature rising. She's approaching heat exhaustion. "I know," Commander Hana said quietly. "But look at her decisions. She's still thinking clearly. She's still adapting. For how much longer?" Hana didn't answer. She couldn't, but she had faith in Yuna. Faith that had been earned through years of watching the young lieutenant solve impossible problems through sheer stubbornness and creative thinking. The desert gave way to frozen mountains as day 6 began. The temperature plummeted from extreme heat to extreme cold within hours, forcing both combatants to adapt once again. Snow fell heavily, reducing visibility to mere meters. Wind howled across the peaks, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Yuna found a small cave and took shelter. She was in bad shape now. Her water was nearly gone, her food down to a few ration bars. Her body was covered in bruises and small cuts from days of constant movement through hostile terrain. She had pushed herself beyond normal human limits, and it showed. Her hands trembled as she tried to eat. and she had to force herself to swallow the dry rations. But she had learned everything she needed to know about Korval. How he moved, how he thought, how his systems worked. She knew his patterns, his preferences, his weaknesses, and now, with less than 2 days remaining, it was time to act. She used what little energy she had left to plan her final approach. The arena would shift one more time, probably to an urban environment or something similar. Those were the typical final stages. Wherever it shifted to, she would make her stand there. No more running, no more hiding. Just one final confrontation using everything she had learned. Korval tracked her to the cave but didn't enter immediately. He had grown cautious after days of her tricks and traps. Instead, he sealed the entrance with rubble, trapping her inside, or so he thought. He would wait outside until she either surrendered or exhausted her supplies. But Yuna had chosen this cave specifically because it had a second exit. A narrow crack in the back wall that led to a different section of the mountain. She squeezed through it, leaving her empty pack behind to make it look like she was still there. By the time Korval realized his mistake and cleared the entrance, she was long gone. Ambassador Tay watched the events unfold with growing respect. The human female was remarkable. She was clearly outmatched in every physical aspect, yet she continued to survive through intelligence and adaptability. It reminded him of something he had read in human literature once, a quote from one of their ancient philosophers. The wise warrior avoids the battle. She wasn't trying to be stronger than her opponent. She was trying to be smarter, and it was working. The betting odds had shifted dramatically now. What started as millions to one against the human had dropped to merely hundreds to one. People across the galaxy were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could actually win this. Not through strength, but through pure stubborn persistence. Day 6 ended with both combatants exhausted in different ways. Korval's physical form remained perfect, but his tactical certainty had eroded. He had expected to end this fight in hours. Instead, it had stretched across nearly a week, and his prey continued to elude him. For the first time in 3 centuries, Korval felt something he had almost forgotten. Doubt. Yuna spent that night collapsed in another temporary shelter, too tired to even eat. Her body screamed for rest, for water, for medical attention, but she gave herself only 3 hours of sleep. 3 hours to let her muscles recover slightly, to let her mind rest, to prepare for what was coming. When she woke, she forced herself to stand despite the pain. She checked her remaining ammunition, sharpened her blade on a rock, and mentally reviewed everything she had learned about her opponent. Tomorrow would be the final day. Tomorrow, the arena would present its last challenge. Tomorrow, she would either win or die trying. Captain Kyung looked at Commander Hana with concern. She can barely stand. How can she possibly fight him in her condition? Because she has to, Hana said simply. Because that's what humans do. We find a way or we die trying. There's no third option. As the 7th day dawned, the arena shifted one final time. The mountains dissolved, replaced by ruins of an ancient city. Massive structures rose from cracked pavement, their walls covered in strange symbols. Some buildings stood intact, others had collapsed into rubble. It was a maze of stone and shadow, tight spaces and unexpected openings. Perfect for one final hunt. Yuna entered the ruins with grim determination. She had nothing left but her training, her knowledge of her enemy, and her absolute refusal to surrender. It would have to be enough. Korval followed her in, his confidence returning. In close quarters, his superior strength and armor would be decisive. She had nowhere left to run, no more tricks to play. This would end today one way or another. What neither of them knew was that the entire galaxy was watching. Billions of beings holding their collective breath, waiting to see how this impossible contest would resolve. Waiting to see if one human could really stand against the might of the apex. The answer was coming, soon. The arena shifted for the first time as the sun set on day 1. The temperature forest began to fade, replaced by a landscape of jagged rocks and narrow canyons. The temperature dropped rapidly. Within an hour, frost formed on the stone surfaces. By the 2nd hour, snow began to fall. Korval barely noticed the change. His armor adjusted automatically, maintaining perfect internal temperature regardless of external conditions. He continued his search with mechanical precision, sweeping grid patterns across the terrain, his sensors reaching out in all directions. Yuna, on the other hand, felt every degree of temperature drop. She found a small cave, checked it carefully for any creatures that might already be living there, and set up a temporary shelter. She ate from her rations, drank sparingly from her water supply, and allowed herself exactly 30 minutes of sleep before moving again. This became her pattern. Move, observe, rest briefly, move again. Never stay in one place too long. Never leave an obvious trail. Always think 3 steps ahead. By day 2, Corval had found 5 different locations where Yuna had stopped. Each time she was gone before he arrived. Each time, she left just enough trace for him to know she had been there. It should have frustrated him, but Corval was a patient hunter. He had tracked prey across entire planets before. This small human could not evade him forever. What he didn't realize was that each site told Yuna something valuable about him. She learned that his sensors had a maximum effective range of about 7 kilometers in heavy terrain. She learned that he preferred to travel along high ground where his line of sight was clearest. She learned that he moved faster during daylight hours and slowed slightly at night, probably to conserve energy even though his armor likely had unlimited power. Most importantly, she learned that he was confident. Too confident. He expected to win, and that expectation made him predictable. On the morning of day 3, the arena shifted again. The frozen canyons melted away, replaced by a dense jungle choked with vegetation. The air became thick and humid, heavy with moisture. Strange plants grew everywhere, some as tall as buildings, others spreading across the ground in tangled mats. The light was dim, filtered through layers of canopy overhead. This was better for Yuna. In open terrain, Corval's superior technology gave him every advantage. But in dense jungle, visibility dropped to meters instead of kilometers. His sensors would be less effective, cluttered with false readings from the abundant life around them. She prepared her first real trap. It took her 3 hours to set up, working carefully with materials she found in the jungle. She used vines and branches to create a snare across a natural pathway between 2 massive trees. The snare itself wouldn't hurt Corval, she knew that. His armor would protect him from anything so simple, but that wasn't the point. She positioned herself in a tree 50 meters away and waited. Corval found her trail easily enough. The jungle floor was soft and tracks were impossible to hide completely. He followed them to the pathway, his weapons ready, expecting an ambush. When he saw the snare stretched across the path, he actually laughed. "A rope trap?" he said aloud, knowing his handlers were monitoring him. "This is what humanity sends against me. Primitive nonsense." He walked directly through the snare, letting his armor slice through the vine without even slowing down. The vine snapped, and a weighted branch swung down from above exactly as designed. It hit his armor and bounced off harmlessly. Corval shook his head and continued forward. Behind him, the sprung trap leaked a thin mist of spores into the air, spores from a local plant that Yuna had found growing near standing water. The spores were harmless to organic life, but they produced a mild electromagnetic field as part of their reproductive cycle. Corval's sensors, picking up the electromagnetic signature, began reporting multiple false contacts. His display filled with phantom readings, each one appearing and disappearing randomly. His armor's systems tried to compensate, filtering out the interference, but it took time. Exactly 43 seconds, Yuna noted from her hiding place. 43 seconds of blind time. That was valuable information. While his sensors were compromised, Yuna moved. She didn't attack. She simply relocated to a completely different area of the jungle, leaving no trail this time. By the time Corval's systems cleared and he realized what had happened, she was gone again. In the observation post, Captain Kyung leaned forward. "Did she just blind him?" "Temporarily," Commander Hana confirmed. "And now she knows exactly how long his systems take to reboot. She's building a profile of his capabilities. But she's running out of time," Kyung protested. "She can't just run forever. Eventually she has to fight him." "She will," Hana said calmly. "When she's ready. When she knows everything she needs to know." Ambassador Tay watched from his vessel with growing fascination. The betting pools across the galaxy had initially favored the apex warrior by impossible odds. Millions to 1 against the human. But now, after 3 days, those odds were shifting. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. People were starting to wonder. The human wasn't winning, but she wasn't losing either. She was surviving. And every hour she survived was an hour she learned. Corval set up camp that night in a clearing he had secured. He didn't need sleep like organic beings did. but he used the downtime to review his tactical data. Something about this hunt felt wrong. The human was too elusive, too careful. She moved like someone who had done this before, but her species had no records of producing warriors of note. He pulled up Earth's military history in his database. What he found surprised him. Humans had fought wars constantly throughout their history, not against alien species but against each other. Thousands of conflicts spanning thousands of years. They had developed tactics for every type of terrain, every type of combat, every possible scenario. They were not a warrior species in the sense that the apex were. They had not been bred for combat. But they had learned it the hard way, through endless trial and error, through countless deaths and defeats and victories. They had refined warfare into a science born from necessity. Korval realized he might have underestimated his opponent. Not her strength or technology, but her knowledge. She was using everything her species had ever learned about survival. And humans, he was beginning to understand, knew a great deal about survival. He would need to change his tactics. On day 4, Korval stopped chasing. Instead, he found a position that gave him clear sightlines in multiple directions and waited. If the human wanted to win, eventually she would need to come to him. He had time. His armor provided everything he needed. He could wait here for all 7 days if necessary. Yuna, watching from a distance, saw the change immediately. He had stopped hunting and started waiting. This was a problem. She couldn't afford to wait him out. Her supplies were limited, and her body was already showing signs of strain. The lack of proper sleep, the constant movement. The stress of being hunted, it was all taking a toll. She needed to change the game. That night, while Korval maintained his vigil, Yuna moved closer than she had ever dared before. She circled his position carefully, staying just beyond the range of his sensors, and began setting up not one trap but a series of them, each one simple, each one seemingly ineffective against his armor. But together they formed a pattern. She was hurting him. When dawn came, she triggered the first trap, a small explosive charge. Nothing that would damage his armor but loud enough to get his attention. Korval immediately moved toward the sound, weapons ready. When he reached the location, he found nothing but scorch marks. Then another explosion, this one to his right. He turned toward it, moving faster now, starting to suspect what she was doing. Another explosion behind him this time, then one ahead. She was surrounding him with noise, trying to confuse him, trying to make him reactive instead of methodical. But Korval was not so easily manipulated. He stopped moving and analyzed the pattern of explosions. They were pushing him toward the east, toward a rocky area where a cliff face rose sharply. She wanted him to go there, which meant he should go anywhere else. He turned and moved west instead. Yuna, crouched in the underbrush, watched him change direction and smiled slightly. He was smart. He had recognized the trap and avoided it. But in avoiding it, he had shown her something important. He thought tactically. He analyzed patterns. He could be predictable in his unpredictability. That was exactly what she needed to know. Day 4 ended with both combatants still alive, still moving, still thinking. But the nature of the hunt had changed. Korval now understood that his opponent was not just prey. And Yuna now understood how her opponent thought. The real fight was about to begin. The arena of worlds materialized in a pocket of folded space, visible to all who wished to watch but accessible to none except the combatants. It was an artificial environment that spanned hundreds of kilometers, a constantly shifting landscape designed to test every possible aspect of survival and combat. The technology to create such a place was ancient, left behind by a civilization that had disappeared millions of years ago. The Galactic Council maintained it for exactly these rare occasions. Billions of beings across the galaxy tuned their viewing devices to watch. Some out of curiosity, most out of morbid fascination. The outcome seemed certain. The Apex were sending Korval the undefeated, and his reputation preceded him like a shadow. Korval stood in the preparation chamber, a towering figure 4 meters tall. His body was a perfect fusion of biological engineering and cybernetic enhancement, built and refined over 3 centuries of constant warfare. His armor was a living thing, bonded to his skin, capable of adapting to any weapon or environmental hazard within microseconds. He had killed champions from 40 different species. He had fought in every type of terrain imaginable. He had never lost. He watched the holographic display showing Earth's champion with something approaching contempt. A young woman, small by any standard, barely past her 25th year. She wore standard combat gear that looked primitive compared to his advanced systems. She carried a rifle that used chemical propellants, a blade made of simple metal, and a small pack that probably held basic supplies. "This is their champion?" Corval asked his handlers. "This is what they send against me. The humans are either fools or they have a plan we cannot see," one of the handlers replied. "Do not underestimate any opponent. I have fought gods made flesh," Corval said. "I will not be troubled by this child." In the human preparation chamber, Lieutenant Yuna checked her equipment with methodical precision. She had volunteered for this mission knowing exactly what it meant. She was not the strongest soldier humanity had. She was not the fastest or the most skilled in any single area. But she had something that made Commander Hana choose her above all others. She understood how to survive. Yuna had grown up on Ganymede Station, a harsh environment where mistakes meant death. She had learned to pay attention, to notice patterns, to adapt to changing situations. She had joined the military not for glory but because she wanted to explore, to see new places, to test herself against new challenges. Every training exercise, every simulation, every mission had taught her something valuable. And now she would use everything she had learned. Captain Kyung, her commanding officer, stood nearby. He looked worried. "You don't have to do this, Yuna. There's no shame in backing out. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Yuna said calmly, checking the sights on her rifle. "And I'm not backing out. This is what needs to be done. He's going to try to kill you." "Yes," Yuna agreed. "And I'm going to try to survive. That's the game." Commander Hana entered the chamber. She looked at Yuna for a long moment and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. 7 days, Hana said. "The arena will run for 7 planetary rotations. The combat ends when one of you is dead or yields. Do you understand?" "I understand," Yuna said. "Remember your training. Remember what you are. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but the most adaptable. Use everything. Trust your instincts. And most importantly, survive." Yuna nodded. "I will." The countdown began. Both combatants were transported into the arena simultaneously, placed at random locations far from each other. The environment began as a temperate forest, but everyone knew it would change. The arena cycled through different terrains every 12 hours, each one more challenging than the last. Yuna materialized in a clearing surrounded by tall trees with purple leaves. The air smelled strange, full of scents she didn't recognize. She immediately dropped to a crouch, making herself small, and listened. Birds, or something like birds, called in the distance. Wind rustled through the branches. Water gurgled somewhere to her left, probably a stream. She didn't move for 5 full minutes. She just listened and watched and let her senses map the area around her. This was the first lesson of survival that most people forgot. Before you act, you need to understand where you are. Across the arena, Corval stood fully upright, scanning the horizon with his advanced sensors. His armor systems mapped the terrain within a 5-kilometer radius instantly. He detected water sources, potential shelters, and most importantly, the thermal signature of his opponent. She was 12.7 kilometers to the northeast. "Stationary, probably hiding. Found you," he said quietly, and began moving in her direction. In the observation post, Commander Hana watched multiple displays showing different angles of the arena. Captain Kyung stood beside her, along with a small team of analysts. "He's moving toward her position already," Kyung said. "His sensors are incredible. She can't hide from him." "She's not trying to hide," Hana said. "Not yet. She's learning." "Learning what?" "Everything she can about where she is." Yuna doesn't react, she observes first. It's what keeps her alive. Ambassador Tay watched from his diplomatic vessel in orbit. The Confederation had no stake in this fight officially, but he found himself unable to look away. The human female was moving now, but slowly, carefully. She stayed under cover of the trees, stopping frequently to examine her surroundings. She found the stream and followed it for a while, then doubled back and approached from a different angle. "What is she doing?" Tay wondered aloud. She was being careful. Too careful. At this rate, Corval would reach her original position long before she could establish any advantage. But then Tay noticed something. She wasn't just moving randomly. Every time she stopped, she did something small. She broke a branch here, disturbed some leaves there, left small marks that looked natural but formed a pattern. She was laying a trail. A false trail? Korval reached the clearing where Yuna had first appeared. His sensors picked up her tracks immediately. He analyzed them, noting her direction of travel, her pace, her weight distribution. His systems calculated her likely destinations and began predicting her movements. He followed the trail confidently. It led deeper into the forest, toward a rocky outcropping that would make a good defensive position, exactly where a frightened prey would run. When he reached the outcropping, he found signs that someone had been there recently. Disturbed earth, broken branches, even a small piece of torn fabric caught on a thorn bush. But no human. His sensors swept the area again. Nothing. She had been here and then vanished. Clever, Korval admitted. You know how to cover your tracks. But it won't matter. I have time and you cannot hide forever. What Korval didn't know was that Yuna had never been to the outcropping. She had created the false trail carefully, using techniques taught to her by instructors who had learned them from ancient human hunters. While he followed the trail she had made, she had moved in a completely different direction, toward higher ground where she could observe without being seen. Now she lay on a ridge overlooking the forest, watching through her rifle's scope as the massive warrior searched the area below. She didn't plan to shoot, not yet. The scope was for observation. She watched how he moved, how his armor flowed and adapted, how his sensors swept the environment. She was gathering data, learning her opponent, understanding what she was up against. This was day 1, hour 3. She had 6 days and 21 hours left, and she planned to use every second of it. In the observation post, Hana allowed herself a small smile. She's not fighting him yet. She's studying him. But he'll find her eventually, Kyung said. Yes, Hana agreed. But by then she'll know everything she needs to know. And that's when it gets interesting. The Grand Convocation Hall floated in the darkness of space, a massive structure built from materials that shimmered like captured starlight. Inside, representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the chamber. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few existed as pure energy contained in special vessels. All of them had come to witness something unprecedented. Commander Hana stood alone on the speaking platform. The platform was huge, designed to accommodate beings of all sizes, and she looked small standing there in her simple gray uniform. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical knot, and her face showed no emotion as thousands of eyes from across the galaxy watched her. Above her, the Apex delegation occupied the highest tier. They always took the highest position in any room they entered. It was their way. The Apex had conquered 73 star systems in the past 2 centuries. They were the most feared military power in known space. Their High Chancellor, Vexith, was a being made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber like the ringing of enormous bells. The human sends one representative, Vexith said, and something in his tone might have been amusement. One single individual to negotiate the surrender of their species. Is this meant as an insult, or does Earth truly have so few who can speak for them? Hana looked up at him without flinching. Earth has many who could speak. We chose to send one because one is all we need. A ripple of sound moved through the chamber, whispers in 1,000 languages. Translator devices working overtime to convey the confusion and disbelief that filled the room. In the middle tiers, Ambassador Tay of the Confederation leaned forward in his seat. He had worked with humans before on trade agreements. He found them strange but honest. Too honest sometimes. They said what they meant and meant what they said, which was unusual in galactic politics. But this seemed like madness. The Apex were offering terms of surrender. Harsh terms, yes, but terms that would allow most of humanity to survive. To refuse with such bravado was suicide. Then let us be clear about what you are refusing, Vexith said. His crystalline form brightened, casting sharp shadows across the hall. The Apex Dominion has claimed your home system. You have one standard cycle to evacuate your planet. Those who comply will be relocated to designated zones. Those who resist will be eliminated. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Hana nodded slowly as if considering his words carefully. I understand. You've made your position clear. Now let me make ours clear. She touched a control on her wrist and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed Earth, that small blue world rotating slowly. Clouds swirled over oceans, Continents were visible through gaps in the white. "This is our home," Hana said quietly. "Humans evolved on this planet. We were born in its caves, we learned to walk on its plains, we built our first cities on its shores. Every human alive today carries the story of Earth in their blood. Our ancestors fought and died on that soil. Our children play on its beaches. Our dead rest in its ground." "Sentimental attachment to a rock," Vexith said dismissively. "The Apex have conquered worlds far older and more historically significant than yours." "I'm sure you have," Hana replied. "But here's what you don't understand. Humans don't surrender our home. Not to you, not to anyone. So I'm going to invoke the ancient law of single combat." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the ambient noise of life support systems seemed to pause. Vexith leaned forward, his massive form looming over the platform. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," Hana said. "The law exists in the Galactic Council Charter. Article 7, Section 12. In matters of territorial dispute, either party may demand resolution through single combat between chosen champions. The victor decides the terms for both parties." "I'm invoking that law now." Ambassador Tay felt his heart sink. Yes, the law existed. It was ancient, rarely used, but legally binding. And the Apex prided themselves on following galactic law, at least when it suited them. But this was insane. The Apex warriors were legendary. They were bred for combat, enhanced with technology, trained for centuries. What human could possibly match them? Vexith seemed to be thinking the same thing. His laughter rang through the chamber like breaking glass. "You wish to settle this with single combat? Very well, I accept your terms. We will send our finest warrior, and when he crushes your champion, Earth will be ours, and there will be no mercy for those who remain." "Agreed," Hana said calmly. "And when our champion wins, the Apex will withdraw from human space and will not return for a period of no less than 1,000 standard years. The Council will enforce this agreement under penalty of total embargo. Your champion will not win," Vexith said with absolute certainty. "We'll see," Hana replied. The Council officials rushed to formalize the agreement. Documents were prepared, oaths were sworn, and the Arena of Worlds was commissioned. It would take one full cycle to prepare everything. In that time, both sides would present their champions. As the session ended and the various delegations began to leave, Ambassador Tay made his way down to the human section. He found Hana standing alone looking out through a massive viewport at the stars beyond. "Commander Hana," he said softly, "may I speak with you?" She turned and offered a small smile. "Of course, Ambassador. Forgive my directness, but what are you doing? The Apex warrior will kill whoever you send. This is suicide." "Maybe," Hana said. "Or maybe the Apex don't understand what they're fighting." "They're fighting humans," Tay said. "I mean no disrespect, but humans are not known as warriors. You're traders, explorers, engineers. You're clever and adaptable, but you're not soldiers." "That's what everyone thinks," Hana said quietly. "Do you know how humans conquered Earth, Ambassador?" "I've read the histories. You evolved as a species and gradually spread across your world." "We walked," Hana said. "We walked out of Africa with nothing but rocks and sticks. We walked across continents, through deserts and over mountains. We walked into frozen tundras and burning wastelands. And everywhere we went, there were predators with bigger teeth and stronger claws. There were environments that should have killed us. But we kept walking. We adapted. We persisted. We refused to die." She looked back at the stars. The Apex asked how many humans it takes to win a war. I told them one, because they need to learn what one human can do when everything is on the line. They need to understand that we don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight for survival, and we are very, very good at surviving. Ambassador Tay wanted to argue, but something in her voice stopped him. There was no bravado there, no false confidence. Just a quiet certainty that made him deeply uneasy. "Who will you send?" he asked finally. "Someone who volunteered," Hana said. "Someone who understands what this means." "I will pray for them," Tay said. "Thank you," Hana replied. "But prayer won't be what saves them. Preparation will." The cycle passed quickly, and soon the galaxy would learn the answer to the Apex's question.